Awesome. Well, welcome back to the Know Your Numbers REI podcast. This is your host, Chris McCormack. And today we have a very special guest of the name, Mr. David McKnight. David graduated from BYU with honors in 1997. And over the past 22 years, he has helped put thousands of Americans on the road to the 0% tax bracket. He has made frequent appearances in Forbes, USA Today, New York Times, Fox Business, CBS Radio, Bloomberg Radio, Huffington Post, Reuters, CNBC, Yahoo Finance, NASDAQ.com, Investors Business Daily, Kiplinger's, Market Watch, and numerous other national publications. His best-selling book, which will be the topic of today's conversation, is The Power of Zero and has sold over 350,000 copies, and the updated and revised version was published by the Penguin Random House. When it was launched in September of 2018, it finished the week of the number 2 most sold business book in the world. For 2 consecutive years, Forbes magazine has ranked The Power of Zero as a top 10 financial resource in the country. This book was recently made into a full-length documentary film entitled The Power of Zero, The Tax Train is Coming. When his follow-up book, Tax-Free Income for Life, launched in November of 2020, it finished the week at the number 3 top-selling business book in the world. He and his wife, Felice, have 7 children, and he has just told me that he is now living in Puerto Rico. So David, welcome to the show. Excited to have you. If you don't mind just giving a brief introduction, if there's anything more to add after that intro there.
No, Chris, I appreciate you having me. Appreciate that warm introduction. And yeah, no, I think that just about captures it.
Of course. Awesome, man. Well, I'm excited. As I mentioned to you, I read the Power of Zero. It was probably a few years back. It was recommended to me as I was starting to build the tax firm that we have today. And I'd just like to start by asking you, what drove you to write this book? Where were you when this became your work, and how has it influenced your life since then?
That's a good question. A good place to start. I wrote it back in 2013. It sort of sprung out of this idea that Americans weren't really all that concerned about the fiscal trajectory of our nation. I mean, after all, Bill Clinton stood before the nation in 1997 and he said, "Hey, I got great news. We've got budget surpluses for the next, 25 years." Okay. So if we keep on this path, we're not going to have any financial issues really for 25 years. And of course, after 25 years, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, the unfunded obligations for those would start to catch up with the country. But he said, look, we shouldn't be incurring any real national debt between now and then. Well, of course, we all know what happened since then. We've piled on $29 trillion of debt in the intervening years, none of which had to do with Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid, all of which had to do with unfunded obligations. For example, the prescription drug program, which was completely unfunded, wars in Iraq, COVID bailouts, et cetera. And so most financial experts look at the long-term trajectory of our country and they say, well, man, the unfunded obligations for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are going to completely sink our ship. I mean, there's a massive $239 trillion gap between what we promised and what we can afford to deliver. But we've managed to add $34 trillion in spite of all that had nothing to do with Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. So I saw a difference between what Americans believed about the future financial trajectory of our nation and what was actually playing out. So in 2013, I wrote Power Zero, which was sort of my attempt to buck this, the prevailing notion that you should get a tax deduction on your retirement savings today and postpone the payment of those dollars till a point in the future, much further down the road when tax rates are likely to be much lower than they are today. Well, our fiscal condition is now such that very well-regarded third-party experts, such as former Comptroller General of the federal government, David Walker, Ed Slott, Wall Street Journal calls him America's CPA. Jamie Dimon is now opining on the national debt. So we have all these third-party experts that are saying, hey, look, tax rates, we're going to face this fiscal cliff in 10 years where tax rates have to rise dramatically or we go broke as a nation. Penn Wharton recently released a study in which they said that if we don't, through some combination of dramatically raising taxes or dramatically cutting back on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid in the next 20 years, we will hit a point of no return. In other words, we will begin this death spiral from which there is no deliverance. In other words, starting in 2043, no combination of raising taxes or reducing spending will be enough to arrest the economic collapse of our nation. And so all of this is sort of a backdrop against which I wrote The Power Zero, which is trying to explain to America that it may not ultimately be in their best interest to continue to contribute dollars to tax-deferred accounts, pushing off that tax, to a point in the future when tax rates are likely to be much higher than they are today, because that act alone could force them to run out of money, 10 to 12 years faster than they otherwise would. Why not pay taxes at historically low tax rates, get those dollars socked away in tax-free accounts so that by the time tax rates do rise dramatically over time, we've done all the heavy lifting, we can then take that money out tax-free. So that was really the premise for writing the book. Obviously, I I self-published the book in 2013. I threw it out on Amazon, crossed my fingers, hoped that it would do well. And, here we are, like you mentioned, 350,000 copies later. It was really sort of a big touch point in my life. Obviously, when you write a book, you get lots of speaking engagements and it sort of puts you on the map. And I wrote a couple of other books that are follow-ups to that book. But, I like to think that we started a little bit of a financial revolution, a tax-free retirement planning revolution, where people are starting to become aware of the fiscal trajectory of our nation, and they now have the tools to be able to do something about it.
Wow. No, that's very knowledgeable of you. I guess it goes deep into the story. My question, I guess, as somebody who has kind of started this financial revolution, how have you seen this or the response to it, right? Because something like life insurance, retirement planning that you talk about and building on tax-free retirement, a lot of people are skeptical of it. And I think you touch upon this a little bit in your book around fees with life insurance retirement and just, what I've seen, people are they don't hold back when it comes to insurance salesmen and life insurance salesmen. So when you released it, and then even maybe in the updated version of 2018, how were you seeing the response? Obviously 350,000 copies is positive, but how about the other side of it?
So there's two places where I've gotten blowback. The first one is people challenging me that tax rates in the future are actually going to be higher than they are today. I had a now infamous exchange with a guy named the White Coat Investor, in which, he wrote a big long blog post about why the basic premise of the Powers Zero was completely wrong. He says, look, tax rates ebb and flow over time. They were higher in the 70s. They're lower now. Maybe they could be higher in the future, but there's no real reason to think that they would be. We're just going to print our way out of the problem. And of course, that flies in the face of what all the third-party experts are saying about the future of tax rates. And so I challenged him on it. We had a series of exchanges. He later, as Joe Biden was running for president, he read over Joe Biden's tax proposal. He goes, hey, if Joe Biden gets elected, I'm going to convert my entire IRA to Roth all in 1 year. And to which I responded on Twitter. I said, I'm glad you're starting to come around. To which he blocked me. But the point is that even my most ardent detractors are beginning to come over into my camp and to recognize that tax rates in the future are going to be higher than they are today. And the other place where I've gotten pushback is this idea of the life insurance retirement plan or cash value life insurance. I specifically utilize in my clients' tax-free retirement plans, Index Universal Life. And I think the pushback that I get is primarily from people who believe that what I'm advocating is that people put all of their retirement savings into these types of vehicles, which obviously couldn't be further from the truth. I'm actually one of the lone voices crying in the wilderness, telling people that they absolutely should resist what they're seeing on TikTok and elsewhere, social media platforms, saying that the IUL is some sort of silver bullet or panacea. The IUL does precisely what it claims to do. It gives you some exposure to the upside of the market with a guarantee against loss. We're not talking stock market replacement. We're talking between 5 and 7% net of fees over time, with a death benefit that also doubles as long-term care. Most of my clients and prospects like the LIRP because it does give them that death benefit that doubles as long-term care. And should they die peaceful in their sleep, never having needed long-term care, someone's still getting a death benefit, probably their kids or their grandkids. So there's that sensation of having paid for something they hope that they never have to use. So I'm actually one of the only, like I said, lone voices in the wilderness trying to get the word out that the LIRP is actually not a silver bullet, that it only really works well when used in concert with all of the other tax-free streams of income in the IRS tax code. What my goal is to try to get people to take advantage of all the nooks and crannies in the IRS tax code, Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks, Roth conversions, taking money out of your IRA up to standard deduction so that those distributions are tax-free. And if you can keep your provisional income low enough, then your Social Security is tax-free. And then and only then should you think about utilizing as a complement to all those other streams of tax-free income, the LIRP or cash value life insurance. And so it really becomes a complement to your financial plan, not the entire financial plan in and of itself. And so I produced a lot of videos on my own YouTube channel, The Power Zero, where I specifically target the people on social media who are trying to make the case that cash value life insurance is the end all be all financial solution, because it certainly isn't. And so that's really my approach. I think it can play a role, but it's certainly not the silver bullet that people make it out to be.
Wow. Yeah, that's reassuring, because I've definitely seen my fair share of people that for every financial situation they come across, the solution is life insurance. And that, I think that's what turns people off. But you're saying, David, that it's usually after you've reached the point of no return for all of the other options from a tax deferral standpoint, a tax-free standpoint, even a taxable bucket standpoint. Do I have that correct?
Well, let me sort of qualify that statement. I'm not saying like you check all these things off your list, and then if you've done all those other ones, then maybe then and only then would you use the cash value life insurance. Let me sort of qualify that statement. I would say, for example, that there's a very specific use that pre-retirees can utilize the LIRP. And let me sort of describe what it is. And this is beyond the long-term care benefit that's inherent in most LIRPs. There's something called a volatility buffer. And basically the problem with traditional stock market investing is there's something called the 4% rule. And this is something I've sort of been critical of Dave Ramsey for over the years. The 4% rule is basically something that academia has come up with, which basically says you can only ever take out 4% of your day one retirement balance in retirement, adjusted for inflation, and have a realistic expectation of having your money last through life expectancy. And you have about an 86% chance your money will last through life expectancy if you can adhere to that 4% distribution rate. Well, Dave Ramsey thinks that number is double. He thinks it's 8%, but that's nearly everybody universally decries that as, up in the night sort of stuff. But here's an interesting thing. The reason why 4% rule is as low as it is because you're going to be taking money out even when the market is down. And because you're taking it out when the market is down, you can't take 8 or 10 or 12% out because that would force your retirement savings into a death spiral from which it never recovers. And so what I found is that if somebody will direct 30% of their retirement savings to a life insurance retirement plan, let that grow and compound over time, and then in retirement, in the year following a down year in the market, pay for your lifestyle expenses out of your LIRP, that gives your stock market portfolio a chance to recover before you take further distributions. And all of the Monte Carlo scenarios that I've done, we've created calculators that show this, is that you can actually double your sustainable retirement distribution rate on your stock market portfolio if you will simply live out of your LIRP in the years following a down year in the market. And that's pretty phenomenal. And so I would say if somebody's young and they want to really wring the most efficiency out of their retirement dollars, contribute, say, 30% of your retirement savings to an LIRP, build up that nest egg over time, and then put the rest of it into a Roth IRA or a Roth 401k. To me, that's a really balanced, comprehensive approach to tax-free retirement that allows you to maximize your withdrawal rate in retirement so you can sort of wring more efficiency out of your stock portfolio.
I guess to tailor this, a lot of our listeners find themselves in the real estate space. We do tax planning for real estate investors. I'm sure that they've come across some financial advisors that talk about the cash value and the benefit that they can receive as real estate investors. For somebody, I'm sure you've worked with some investors yourself. What is different or what is the same for somebody who is looking to physical assets like real estate when it comes to building a retirement nest egg and planning for taxes in the future?
Well, my goal is to get my clients at or near the 0% tax bracket in retirement. For some people, that won't ever be possible. For example, if you have a pension from the federal government or from a school or what have you, that's always going to flow into your financial life, flow onto your tax return as reportable income. And if that amount of money exceeds your standard deduction in retirement, you're going to be in a tax bracket and it's not going to be the 0% tax bracket. So people who have real estate, they can offset a lot of the income from real estate through depreciation, things like that. But that's not always the case. A lot of people will do 1031 exchanges from property to property to property. And then so they can postpone the payment of that tax. And then when they die, their heirs get a step up in basis. So they've effectively eluded the IRS for their entire lives. But at some point, some of that income is likely to flow into your tax return. And so long as that income is less than your standard deduction, you can be in the 0% tax bracket. But if you have massive, massive holdings, that's not always going to be possible. And some of that real estate income can even sort of be treated from a tax perspective like a pension. And at that point, you're sort of exposed to the ebb and flow of tax rates over time. And if tax rates are trending upward, then you're going to be exposed to that, what I call tax rate risk. And then some people like to use life insurance as, this is sort of the bank on yourself strategy where you build a nest egg up within that life insurance policy. And then instead of taking a loan from a bank, you take a loan from a life insurance company and you use the cash value as collateral against that loan. And then instead of paying the bank back, you pay back the loan on your life insurance. And can be some arbitrage there that makes it sort of sexy for people over time. It could give you some extra growth and compounding. So that's sort of my take on real estate as it relates to the type of planning that I do.
Okay, cool. So basically knowing that real estate, you get the tax benefit from real estate. And when you retire, there's still a chance that you can end up with income on your tax return through real estate. And that's when the life insurance would come on top of the other benefit, which would be kind of be your own banker type mentality that a lot of people have.
Right. So if you are going to be on the IRS's radar, the goal would be to be in as low a tax bracket as possible. So if you say, hey, there's no avoiding the fact that I'm going to have some income on my tax return from my real estate. So we worry about the things that we can control. We don't worry about the things we can't control. So if that real estate income is always going to be there, or it could be farm income, or it could be just plain old regular income because you're working a job or whatever, then let's make sure that all of the other income is coming to us tax-free. So maybe we have some taxable income on one end from the real estate, but let's make sure that any other income we're taking out comes from the Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks, Roth conversions, cash value life insurance, et cetera.
Awesome. And you are not a CPA yourself. I know the 2018 forward was done by a CPA. How is your approach to what I'll call tax planning? How is that responded to by CPAs? Because it can be a variety of responses. I'd love to hear how they've taken some of your approaches.
I get CPAs. I just had one yesterday that said, Dave, I'm a CPA. I don't sell life insurance. I don't sell mutual funds. I don't sell annuities, nothing. But I read your book and I completely embrace what you're saying. And I want to help my clients get to the 0% tax bracket by referring them to certified Power Zero advisors, et cetera. And then I get people that, some CPAs, they feel like it's their job to save their clients taxes today and in the here and now. And they're not really focused. Let's face it, there's a certain segment of the population that loves getting a tax refund at the end of the year. And CPAs recognize that. And they recognize that there's a segment of the general public that equates the value and the worth of a CPA with their ability to generate that tax refund at the end of the year. And so within that framework, there's certain CPAs that are trying to save their clients as much money as they possibly can today. I try to make the case that that's not always the best move. It's not always the best move because you're saving taxes at historically low tax rates. You're getting a deduction at tax rates while they're on sale, as low as we're likely to see in our lifetime, only to postpone the payment of those taxes in the case of an IRA or a 401k to a period in the future much further down the road when tax rates are likely to be much higher than they are today. And so I try to talk sense into these CPAs, but these CPAs often have other conflicting motivations. And so, it's hard to explain to a CPA who's spent his entire career trying to get people tax deductions that they should forego those tax deductions in favor of paying more tax in the here and now so that they can save on taxes 20 years from now when the CPA might be dead or gone or in retirement and have severed any relationships with that client. So it's sort of a tough dynamic, but we've learned to navigate it pretty well.
And how have you learned to navigate that? Is there projections that you run or illustrations for somebody who works with clients and knows that they like to get refunds and kind of attributes that worth of their CPA to the refund that they get? How could somebody like ourselves communicate that?
So we're not making these tax moves or these investment recommendations because we have a 1-year horizon or even a 5-year or 10-year horizon. We're making these recommendations because of the impact they'll have over the life of someone's retirement. And that's why for us, it's pretty important to say, okay, let's look at the impact of these recommendations over the arc of a 30-year retirement. Okay. So we'll typically do what we call a before and after comparison. It's basically 3 different comparisons. The first comparison says, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, if you keep on doing what you're doing, you don't change a thing, tax rates stay about where they are today, when will your money run out? And we'll show them roughly, given certain variables, when their money will run out. And then we'll run a second comparison that says, if you keep on doing exactly what you're doing, you don't change a thing, and tax rates were to double, like a lot of experts are predicting, how much sooner will you run out of money? And plot spoiler here, in most cases, it's 10 to 12 years faster. And then we'll run a third comparison that says, if you can implement all of the recommendations that we're recommending that you implement, we get you at or near the 0% tax bracket, we get your Social Security tax-free. How much longer will your money last? And you say, guess what? If your money lasts 5 to 7 years longer, you spend an extra $1.5 million along the way, it's probably worth looking into. And so to me, the math always corroborates the strategy. And I love it when things make sense conceptually, but I love it even more when things make sense mathematically. And so we try to undergird all of our recommendations with some pretty solid math.
That's awesome. And if somebody's looking to get involved with either being an advisor, because we have financial planners and people in the financial industry that listen to this show, or want to speak with somebody on your team, is there an easy way for them to do that?
Yeah. So if you're a financial advisor and want to learn more about our strategies, just head over to powerzero.com and you can opt into a free 3-part video series that talks about what we do. And if you're someone looking for a certified Power Zero advisor, just head over to davidmcknight.com and click on the connect with an advisor button, and we'll hook you up with a Power Zero advisor in your area.
Awesome. That's helpful. And we'll be sure to link that in the show notes. I do want to kind of touch upon the idea of the future tax rate, right? I think in your latest edition of the book, the 2018 version, obviously there was a big tax change in 2017. How has your approach to the power of zero and the life insurance retirement plan, how has that probably increased over the past 7 years since the change of that tax change? Obviously, COVID did an impact on that too. Where do you find yourself now? If you had to rewrite or maybe even update it for a 2024 version, what would that look like? Would your warnings be greater, the same, lower?
Obviously, the debt has gotten a lot worse since 2018, even more than most experts predicted because of COVID. I mean, we added $6 trillion just because of COVID. I mean, we added $6 trillion in 1 year. It normally takes us 6 years to add that type of debt. And so obviously the debt trajectory is a whole lot worse than it was when I wrote, even when I updated it in 2018. The other thing I would say is in 2018, I made a really big deal about the 24% tax bracket. I call that the sweet spot in the Trump tax cuts. And the reason I say that is because, look, most people that we come across are in the 22% tax bracket. And even Dave Ramsey will say things like, well, you should convert up to the top of your existing tax bracket. Well, the 24% tax bracket is only 2% more than the 22, but it allows you to convert roughly an extra $173,000 or so dollars and only pay 2% more on the margin. I mean, if you got $1 million in your IRA, there's no way you're going to convert all of that to tax-free by staying in the 22% tax bracket. But the 24% tax bracket allows you to convert that extra $173,000 to the tax-free bucket. So you actually now have a realistic chance of sheltering those dollars from the impact of future tax increases. But here we are 2 years before the deadline. We only have 2 years within which to get that money shifted over. So if you've got $1 million in your IRA or even $1.5 million, shifting, I don't know, 200 or 250,000 per year within the next 2 years is not going to do a whole lot for you. And so I focus less on the 2026 deadline and more on what is likely to happen in 2030. Okay. There's a bunch of different people that have predicted various things. There's an economist that I pay attention to by the name of Brian Boulou. He's been advising Fortune 500 companies for the last 30 years with 95% accuracy. He's predicting a Great Depression in 2030. I'm not maybe going to go that far, but certainly tax rates have to rise dramatically in 2030 or things really get messy for our country. David Walker wrote in his book, Come Back America, that effective tax rates would have to double by 2030. And every year the federal government postpones doubling tax rates, it'll just be that much worse down the road. And I talked about the Penn Wharton study where we basically have 20 years through some combination of tax increases or massive reductions in spending. We have to sort of arrest the growth of the national debt, or we slip into that debt spiral from which there's no deliverance. So I'm less focused on what's happening in 2026 because, the 22 becomes 25, the 24 becomes the 28. Not such a big deal. It's, minor increases on the margin. We're talking a doubling of tax rates in 2030 and beyond. That's what people should really be worried about. So I will probably update and revise the Power Zero again prior to 2026 when the tax cuts expire. But I think the thing that people really have to worry about is not the increase in tax rates in the short term. It's what we're likely to see in the mid to long term.
Okay. No, that's so helpful. And I think a listener, as somebody who's listening to you speak in real time, it can be easy for us to grow fearful. And I think there's some wisdom behind that. But what would you recommend, if anything, to somebody who might be late 20s, early 30s, kind of just getting started in their income years, starting a family, and sees this 6-year trajectory of what some people will say the Great Depression? What are some key takeaways that they should be on the lookout for and looking to implement?
Yeah, I would say the farther out into the future your retirement horizon is, the more you should be thinking about tax-free retirement planning accounts. The more, tax rates aren't going to go like straight up. I think they're going to go like this. They're going to sort of rise subtly over time to the point where at some point in time, we'll get to double where we are today, which tells you that if you're saving for retirement, you should always be thinking about putting money in tax-free accounts, because the tax you're going to be paying today is always less than the tax you're going to be paying down the road should you defer that tax through a 401k or IRA. And so I think that people, that are younger, just resist the temptation to get that tax deduction. As a country, we're addicted to tax deductions. We love the tax deduction. We love getting that tax refund at the end of the year. Resist the impulse to get that tax reduction. Pay the tax today so that you won't have to, withdraw those dollars at some point way down the road when tax rates almost certainly are going to be much higher than they are today. So that's what I would say. And I would say, take advantage of all of the nooks and crannies and the IRS tax code that they make available to you. Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks, Roth conversions, cash value life insurance. Try to also resist the impulse. For example, Dave Ramsey saying all cash value life insurance sucks 100% of the time. Try to resist that impulse. We've shown through math, a lot of Monte Carlo studies and scenarios and modeling that we've run, that by using that volatility buffer strategy that we talked about, you can dramatically increase the income you can draw from your assets in retirement. And so that's a big deal. So try to look at the math and science behind what we're talking about and resist the popular opinions out there from people who maybe haven't really specialized in tax-free retirement planning like we have here at Power Zero.
Yeah, absolutely. And probably speak to somebody who is knowledgeable and like your Power of Zero advisors, somebody who can, and I'm assuming you guys take a full picture. So like somebody investing in real estate is probably not going to look at the same as somebody who's just working a W-2 or making 7 figures in a business. It all
Right. I
varies.
mean, the one thing we know is that there's no cookie cutter approach to what we do. Everybody's a little bit different. And so the challenge is to try to meet people where they are and take a look at their situation and try to say, what can we do to improve the amount of money they can draw from their assets over the course of a lifetime? And that takes individualized, custom tailored type planning.
Mm-hmm. And so are you meeting with people, or your advisors meeting with people on a regular basis, once a year,
Yeah,
once a quarter?
you've got about 250 Power Zero certified advisors across the country. And it takes obviously a while to implement the initial plan. And then you're meeting at least yearly to be able to, because a lot of what we call for is Roth conversions and shifting money from taxable and tax deferred buckets systematically to tax free. And that's something that where you have to do things. It's not set it and forget it, right? You have to do things on an annual basis to realize the benefits of the plan. And so that involves some hand holding and some patience and some tailorized.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And have you ever, because you're pretty well known, you have a book and the YouTube channel, have you ever had a conversation with somebody like Dave Ramsey?
Lots of people have written about my book. Clark Howard, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Clark Howard. He's got a nationally syndicated radio show. You're listening to the Clark Howard show. And so he's fairly well known. His website wrote sort of a hit piece on my book back in like 2015. Is it a good idea to get to the 0% tax bracket? Well, if nobody believes that tax rates are going up in the future, it's probably not a good idea to be in the 0% tax bracket. But what they fail to do is they fail to actually look at the fiscal trajectory of the country and why that might necessitate higher taxes. And obviously, I've had the back and forth with White Coat Investor. It seems like there's one other one. I can't seem to get the attention of Dave Ramsey, even though I had a recent video that went viral of Dave Ramsey when he sort of lost it. He sort of eviscerated his poor co-host, George Camel, for preaching the 4% rule on his website. And he said George is a fool or whatever he said, which is too bad because George seems like a nice guy, but really eviscerated him on air for preaching the 4% rule. And he said, you should be able to take 8, 10, shoot, even 12% of your money, in retirement, which of course, all the CFPs were just, had this visceral reaction when they heard that. So I did a video on that sort of went viral, that actually got picked up by MSN.com. That's how viral it went. MSN.com did an article on the video, but that hasn't been enough to attract the attention of Dave Ramsey so far. I've got a book coming out called The Guru Gap, in which I specifically target Dave Ramsey. That'll probably get his attention, I would imagine.
Yeah, I hope so. And maybe gets you on a show to kind of have a conversation. I think it's healthy to have those dissenting opinions and in love, obviously, and try to get to the truth. That's what we're all after.
I'm not trying to make it a personal critique. I'm just trying to advance the dialogue around sustainable retirement planning principles and do it in a respectful sort of a way. But, you have to call people out when they say things that I have something called the Dave Ramsey Circle of Poverty, where he meets people where they are, which is in poverty. And he teaches them principles that get them out of poverty and get them to the point where they're now saving money and wealthy. But then he tells them once they're wealthy to put 100% of their retirement in stocks and no bonds, and to take 8% distribution rates, because he thinks they're going to get 12% year over year over year, which of course causes you to run out of money 10 to 15 years faster than you otherwise would. So you start poor, he gets you to be rich, and then he makes you poor again. So that's what I call the Dave Ramsey Circle of Poverty. So I think we need to take these issues head on, because I think that, Dave Ramsey's good at what he's good at, which is getting people out of debt, but he's not so great at getting people to live sustainable retirements. And so I think if nobody, if the emperor has no clothes and nobody says anything about it, I think that's where we have the issues as a country. We have to be able to call a spade a spade.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I honor you for being able to do that. Obviously, it's not easy. You face backlash. You put yourself out there for criticism and rebuke, but I do appreciate your point of view and what you've done with it, and obviously training other people to do the same. So now you're in Puerto Rico. For people that are interested, what's your day-to-day like now? Is it fully invested in Power of Zero and raising up the next line of consultants? Is that where the majority of your time is?
I tell people I can run my organization from anywhere on the planet, and when given the choice to not pay tax, I don't. So that's, Puerto Rico, they waive your federal tax, they waive your state tax. Waive your federal, they waive your state, they charge you a flat 4% tax, and then they waive your capital gains tax. So everything that I save feels like I'm saving it within a Roth IRA, so long as I stay in Puerto Rico. So there's obviously some good benefits. There's a trade-off. I don't get into those trade-offs because then some of the locals send me nasty grams. but there is a trade-off. I love it in Puerto Rico. But like I said, I can train my advisors from Puerto Rico. I can create my YouTube videos. I can write my next book, all from Puerto Rico. And so that's the nature of the world in which we live, is you can accomplish a lot of things virtually. And so that's what I've chosen to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, that's cool. And the 7 children, are they, what age range do you have the 7 kids? Are they?
So my youngest is 9 and my oldest is 22. So in about every 2 years in between.
Nice. Well, that's good too. I like to always admire somebody who's willing to put themselves out there and provide for a large family like
someone's
yourself.
got to keep Social Security solvent. So I've tried to do it all on my own. So
awesome. So for people that are looking to get involved, obviously davidmcknight.com, Power of Zero advisors for the financial advisors. Any last pieces of advice or anything else you'd like to promote? You got the new book coming out.
Just tell people to check out my YouTube channel. It's Power of Zero. I put out three videos a week and touching just about every possible financial topic out there, but with a specific slant towards tax-free retirement planning.
Awesome. Well, David, thank you so much for joining us. To the listeners, thank you for listening. Be sure to go and check out David's book, The Power of Zero, and his YouTube channel as well. You won't want to miss it. And it's paid dividends in my life, and we'll continue to do so as we look to make full use of the low tax bracket. So David, thank you. Blessings to you, and appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me.